It was just such a normal day. And I was home with the boys because it was spring break. And Ben had a cold, but I wasn't worried about him at all, and I'm like, you're not feeling so well or whatever. And he just wasn't himself. But we were in the kitchen and his eyes got really big. And then he started turning blue, like fast. I mean, it was like acute and immediate, and then I was like, where's the phone? And called 911 and he had gone limp. And so I started doing CPR on him.
Well, if you could go back to yourself right after Ben died and tell yourself something, what would you tell yourself?
I would want her to be so gentle with herself. It's like making me choke up.
Yeah.
She loved that child so much.
This is the Lost Child podcast, where we delve into the topic of losing a child. Before we get started, we've noticed that only 20% of you are subscribed. One small way that you can show your support is by hitting that subscribe button. Our goal is to get this metric to 50%. As we gain subscribers, we can attract some of the most influential thought leaders in this space, which will help us all. It doesn't cost anything, so just hit that subscribe button. Now, let's jump into the podcast. Thanks, Jeanette, for coming on the podcast and being willing to share some of your story with us.
Oh, absolutely. It's really an honor to be with you.
Awesome.
I'm happy to be with you today.
Thank you. Just to jump right in, can you give us your son's name who ended up passing away?
My son is Ben. Benjamin is his full name, but we always called him Ben. Sometimes we called him Mr. Ben, and we called him Benno. Sometimes Benno. Never Benny. His middle name is Murray, which is my last name.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
And his last name is Packard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Ben Murray
is there
Packard.
any tie? Did you guys just like the name Ben or Benjamin?
Yeah, we don't have a great name story. We just really liked it.
Yeah.
Really liked the name Ben, just the shortened name Ben. For whatever reason, I didn't ever call him Benny or never wanted him called Benny. Yeah, I guess we just get a feel for who our child is and what their name is. But Benno, for some reason, rolled off the tongue for us. Mr.
Awesome.
Ben too, because sometimes he just sort of earned that title.
Yeah.
Tell us about him.
He's our second son, and our first son's name is Matthew, and Ben was born on Matt's third birthday.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Which was really cool.
Okay.
So I remember, I was so pregnant with Ben, and Matt's birthday was coming up, and I was like, we need to get Matt's party out of the way. So we did it early. And then, after the party was over, I'm like, okay. And I got in the bouncy castle thing and I was like, just started bouncing. I'm like, see if I could induce labor right then. But it didn't work. He waited another week or so and then was born on Matt's birthday.
Oh, wow.
And that was just super special. I wasn't sure how Matt was going to take it. When you have a second child, they're always like, first child has maybe complicated feelings about the second child. And so I remember in the hospital, I made sure to put Ben in the little bassinet when Maddie came in because it was his birthday, and I wanted to, make a fuss of Matt. And he came running into the hospital room, and we had balloons for him and gifts for him and everything in the hospital. And I was like, happy birthday, Matt. And he's like, where's my brother? And he just beelined over to Ben.
Cool.
He had no interest he wasn't worried about his own birthday at all.
I love that so much.
And so they were just really sweet brothers together. It was really special to have that shared birthday thing. Maddie is a more introverted personality, very contemplative, very thoughtful. And Ben was much, much sort of sunny, like wilder and louder and funny. He had, even though he was just a little guy, he had a very developed comic timing. He had a way he could do impressions. He was a little kid, right? He died before he was 3 years old. But for example, I used to be a sign language interpreter and I interpreted theater. And I was interpreting My Fair Lady, the musical. And so I had to listen to the music over and over again. And there's a Cockney accent, a British Cockney accent in the song. And Ben could do that Cockney accent so perfectly. So to this day, that soundtrack, the My Fair Lady soundtrack, almost brings me to my knees because it was just, so Ben and driving in the car with, singing those songs. And he was just so funny. yeah, he was, he was very personable and curious and sassy and athletic. Yeah, he was a big personality.
He sounds amazing.
What are some other things that you remember? What the memories that you have of him?
Of Ben, I just, I was working full time, and and then when I was pregnant with him, I was like, I've got to figure out how to work less. Yeah. And so we ended up selling our house and moving to a less expensive house. So I had time with him. We, one of the things, we had this sort of morning ritual. He would be the first one up, and you'd hear him down the hallway, and he would always come to my side of the bed, and I would sort of put my arm out, and he would fold over on my arm, and I would just whip him up into bed. And then I would try to get him to, snuggle and go back to sleep, which of course he wouldn't. Yeah. And Dean, my husband, he would sort of laugh and roll over because he knew I was going to be that one that, I would say, Daddy wants to, get up with you. And Ben would say, no, I want mama, I want mommy. Yeah. And so I would get him up, and we would go, and I would make coffee, and then I would make Benno coffee, which was Ovaltine. Yeah. Ovaltine every morning. So we just had this ritual where we would make our hot beverage for the morning and have that time together before Matt got up and before Dean got up. They loved their Brio trains. We spent a lot of time. We had a 3-2 house, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. But instead of the boys each having their own room, we had one bedroom and then one playroom.
Okay. Cool.
And so we really just spent a lot of time in that playroom, lots of books. The movie that they loved at that time was Shrek. So again, he could sing those Shrek songs. And back in that time, it was boom boxes, right? Mm-hmm. And so he would just push replay on the song "I'm a Believer," and he would sing "I'm a Believer." These memories are really, really vivid, because they involve so many senses.
Yeah.
I wonder if you have the same sort of experience where some of those memories are so, sensual, sensy that you can just feel it still, even though it's been now 23 years.
Wow.
This weekend. So this weekend is tomorrow.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
23 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Here's also a reminder to subscribe and follow this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. Now, back to the podcast. Well, do you want to tell us a little bit about how Ben ended up passing away?
Sure.
And the best thing is almost like a narrative from your perspective, everything that happened. And if there's any holes that we can fill in after. Just kind of take us through a narrative story.
Yep.
From your position.
Yeah, I'm used to telling this story. So it was just such a normal day. And I know a lot of people start their story that way because it is looking back, it's just so amazing what a regular day it was. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And I was home with the boys because it was Good Friday and it was spring break for Matt. Matt was a kindergartner, and Dean was off at work. Dean was a high school teacher at that time. And I was home with them, and we actually had a little friend of Matt's over, and I wasn't worried at all, at zero. Ben had a cold, but I wasn't worried about him at all. Mm-hmm. And I always emphasize that because, everyone's like, mom's intuition and mothers know everything. And I wasn't worried about him at all. Mm-hmm. And neither was Dean. And even though he had a cold, but it was just so, regular. It seemed so regular. Mm-hmm. And Matt and his little buddy were playing in the playroom, and Ben was playing with them too. But at some point, Ben was annoying them, the little brother. And so they sort of called out to me, and so I got him to be with me. And he started a little fussing more and complaining more. And I just thought it was because he was getting left out. Yeah. And I'm like, you're not feeling so well or whatever. And he just wasn't himself. But again, it didn't seem strange to me at all. Well, the next, and I still don't know if I don't have this timing right in my head because it's such a weird thing. Yeah. But we were in the kitchen and his eyes got really big and I was startled because he looked startled, and then he started turning blue like fast, and I grabbed him and and then I was like, "Where's the phone?" Because I could. It was like acute and immediate, and we ran into our bedroom, and called 911, and it was clear that he was, he had gone limp and everything. And so I started doing CPR on him while I had them on the phone. And we were on the floor in the bedroom. And I remember things like, and I was CPR trained because I was a lifeguard before. And so I was certified and stuff. So I knew what I was doing, but at the same time, I couldn't believe I was doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like I was having this surreal, like looking down at myself kind of thing, thinking, how can I possibly be doing CPR on my child? And my hair, I have this, sort of long, big hair, and it was getting in my way. And I remember thinking, how come they don't tell you? Like, I don't know what they could tell you to do, but right. But my hair wasn't, and it was just, and it was all happening so fast, and they were talking to me on the phone, and they were, everything. And, then they're like, they're on the way and all the stuff. And then I said, can I move into the front room? And they said, yeah. And so I pick him up and I run him to the front room. And then they meaning the paramedics, arrived, and I'm sort of searching my visual memory here. They seemed like a lot of them. Like I would guess like there were like 8 people.
Oh, wow.
Who came in, and somebody was filming.
What?
And it turned out they were making some video footage for some training purpose or something. But when they realized the extent of what was going on, they stopped filming.
Okay.
Wow.
But I remember I grabbed one of them, like held on, like hugged, while the rest of them went over to Ben.
Yeah.
And I have to back up a little because, because I wasn't aware of it. Later, I found out Matt and Maggie, who's the little friend, had come out and seen all this going on and seen me doing CPR on Ben, and that Maggie had grabbed Matt and pulled her into a closet. So, so they worked on Ben and stabilized him enough to get him in the ambulance. One of the paramedics stayed back with Matt and Maggie, and I jumped in the front of the ambulance.
Wow.
And then I was like, do you know? And I told them my brother's name. I said, do you know? And they were like, yeah. I'm like, that's my brother. And then they were like, because my brother was a firefighter and a paramedic. And so it was sort of like, of course they take care of everybody, but it was like, oh, it's one of our own kind of thing, too. So and I didn't know this at the time, but they then contacted my brother. Like they somehow communicated with each other, and somebody communicated with my brother. So by the time I got to the ambulance, it was only to the hospital, it was only a few minutes before my brother was there.
Oh, okay.
And we get to the hospital and the ER, and, they just rush Ben in, and they don't really, they can't talk to me yet because they just, it's just emergency. And so they sort of, and then a chaplain came and sat with me. And then one of my best friends was a doc at this hospital.
Oh, wow. So
I asked for her, and she was there. So she came. And I remember hearing like code blue, like over the thing. And it was Ben coding. Yeah. And then when they stabilized him, then they let me come in. And I just remember he was naked, and he was my baby with all these tubes and stuff in there. And so this hospital, on the west side of Tucson, is not the trauma center in Tucson. So they needed to transfer us.
Oh, wow.
So they loaded us into the ambulance again, and off we go. And
was your husband notified at this point?
I was going to say, I'm like, and I have to back up again. I, at the hospital, was trying to reach Dean. He was a teacher, and they were like, he's teaching. And I'm like, I know he's, I know he's,
this is more important than teaching.
And so I had called once, and I think I called from the house first, and then he wasn't at the hospital. So then I called again, and they said, yeah, we sent a message on our side. I said, it's an emergency. His son, I was like, and so then they got him a message, and he ended up, I can't even remember if he was at that hospital, if it wasn't until we got to the other one. But on the drive, he definitely wasn't in the ambulance with me. On the drive to the other hospital, which is, 3 miles away, not very far.
Okay.
Yeah. Just in Tucson, it's just, maybe 4 miles.
Mm-hmm.
Ben coded in the back. So we were good. You don't go lights and sirens if the person is stable. So we're driving and then all of a sudden it's lights and sirens.
Oh,
and then we're flying, past the University of Arizona, which is where I work. And, it's just, I still have memories of like the student, when students are crossing this big street because it's the university and thinking, get out of the way, cars pull over. And then we got to the hospital and of course they rushed him in. They packed him on ice. That was sort of a new thing
Cool
at that
down.
time.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. It was sort of a new thing that they did. And then it wasn't too long before they told us that he wasn't going to make it.
Mm.
And Dean, I remember the room we were in, Dean like sort of doubled over and like threw up.
Oh, geez.
And I feel like the doctor said to me, "Are you okay?" And I was like, no.
Obviously not.
Yeah, no. But it was like, okay, so then what do you do? Because he was on life support. And I talked to this doctor. So and I'm out of order now, which is how this
You're
goes,
good.
right?
No,
Which is how this goes. All along the way, people were like, you did the right thing. Like the paramedic, you did the right thing. And you can kind of feel like they know that a mother is going to blame herself. And, and so they were trying to reassure me that, I did CPR and it was what I did. And that was super kind. But it was this doctor who was working on Ben who really pulled me aside and talked to me privately and said, when I, in my 30s or something, my wife, who was in her 30s, died in front of me. And he said, I couldn't save her. And I'm a ICU doc and I couldn't save her. And he wasn't making the story about himself. He was knowing that I was going to blame myself probably for the rest of my life. And that was such a gift to me that he just sort of matter-of-factly was like, no, you did it. You did it. You did what you could do. And as people die, sometimes just people die. And I hold that man, his name's Bob, as sort of one of the angels in this whole situation. So I asked him, he also had a child Ben's age at the time. And I asked him, once they told us he wasn't going to survive, I said, what would you do? Because they had given me choices. Like, you can leave him on life support and see what happens, but he's not going to survive. But you can remove part, you can extubate him, but leave him on the all this stuff. And I was like, so I said to this doc, what would you do? And he said, I would, probably extubate him, but leave him on some of the, I can't remember what he said or whatever. So that's what we did. And our friends had been arriving and my parents had flown in. And so this was about a 24-hour period altogether. My parents had flown in from Oregon. And so friends were all around us and we just were all together. It probably took them about 3 hours to die. Wow. And they had him originally in one of those kind of cribs, hospital cribs, but I was like over the crib and trying to hold him and touch him and stuff. And they were so kind. They were like, we're going to switch this out. And they had to had a whole bunch of people come in because they had to disconnect stuff. And they did this 1, 2, 3 thing where they pulled out the crib, put in a bed and connected them all up. So I could be in bed with him. And I was, I was in the bed with him on me when he died.
Wow.
So
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, as you know, it's like cellular, because they're just part of who you are, part of you. And I could have never fathomed the pain that I was feeling and going to feel for quite some time.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was something else to walk out of that hospital, which is right in the center of Tucson, right where I grew up, right where I live, to walk out of that hospital that I had driven by a million times and leave my child in there, you know, and then go back to my brother's house and like sit in his living room. And what do you do? You know,
how quickly did you go and tell Matt? That was one experience that we had.
Yeah.
That we came straight from the hospital. We went in a room with the boys and we were just like, here's what it is.
Yeah.
She's not coming back.
Yeah. Matt came to the hospital.
Okay.
So Matt saw him while he was still alive.
Okay.
And so one of the things I just like, you know, I get into problem solving mode. Right. And it's like, okay, Matt, and Matt was by this time, Matt was at his cousin's house, Peter, that brother of mine who was the firefighter, his son, and they're like the same age. And so Matt and Peter came. I can still picture them holding hands. So they were both 5-year-olds, and walked in, saw Ben attached to all the machines and stuff. They stood there probably less than a minute and walked out.
Oh, wow.
And then when Ben died, Maddie came in and saw his body, and that was it. I think.
Okay.
I think he came in at the very end. Yeah. So Matt knew.
Yeah.
And I then was like, you know, what are we going to do for Matt? And so from the hospital, like I was like calling, like, what's the support for Matt and all the rest. So we in Tucson have a very amazing place called Tunadito, and they have a children to children program for grieving kids that
Can you say that
I knew
again?
about.
Because it was almost kind of quick. I didn't catch it.
The organization is called Tunadito, which means your little nest in Spanish. Tunadito, and one of the programs is called Children to Children, and it's a support group for grieving kids.
Wow.
And their families. So you go twice a month, and the kids go off together, and then the parents, you know, group. And it was one of the most important supports we got. Wow. Matt loved going to it. I told you he was a little more introverted kid. And of course, everybody knew that Ben had died. And at school, he was getting a lot of attention and, you know, about being the kid whose brother died. And I think going to Children just really made him feel normal. You know,
other kids
like everybody had a sad story, right? He wasn't special in his sad story. And so he could really like sort of breathe there and do the work that they did, but with these kids who like they could just be silly and joyful together and work on their grief together, you know? Yeah. So it was a super important part of our support.
So did the doctors say that Ben just passed away from like the common cold, but like complications because of the cold?
He died of croup virus.
Oh, croup.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that came back from the pathology report and after the medical examiner's report.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he had croup. Croup typically have any of your kids had croup?
No.
It's a very easy to identify cough. Generally, it sounds sort of like
cough.
Exactly. But when it's bad, they don't make that cough because they don't have enough airway to make it. So it can sneak up on you.
Oh.
And which is what
happened to him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. A friend of mine, that doc I mentioned, she said when she was in medical school that a kid like died in the hospital from it because they couldn't see it. You have to like measure pulse ox kind of stuff, I think, which they do. They do treat it differently now than they used to. It used to just be like, turn on hot water and get the steam going in the bathroom and
try to open stuff up.
Which is what works for a mild case of croup. But I always tell everybody, go straight to the ER. I'm like, just tell them you're the Ben Spells lady. Just go straight to the ER. Yeah. if you're concerned.
So then take us from there with like what happened with you. How did you kind of try to cope with some of the stuff just right there in that first week and first month and stuff?
Yeah. I mean, the first day, Matt was coughing.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm like, oh my gosh.
You're freaking out.
Yeah. Well, normally I wouldn't, right?
Yeah,
it's like a kid's cough. Yeah. But I'm like, so I just called the pediatrician. And of course they knew the pediatrician was all involved with this. Yeah. And they're like, of course we'll treat him. And they, I'm like, I know I'm overreacting.
Yeah.
Matt's a bigger kid and croup is, if a smaller airway is easier to close, right?
Yeah.
So just right off the bat, it's like, oh my gosh, how do you parent your kids after you've lost a kid, right? Without being just absurdly overprotective.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew right away that was going to be a challenge for me. And it was, I think we did pretty well with it, but, we were so fortunate that we had this community, friends, family that really swooped in, really, and this is sort of what Ben's Bells was born out of, was just the kindnesses that came in all kinds of forms.
Yeah.
One person who I didn't even know very well, like went to all the flower stores she could find, it like got their day old flowers and stuff. And we came like she just covered our front yard in flower petals. Like just these, these communications of, we know there's nothing we can do, but we want you to know like how surrounded you are.
Mm-hmm.
I was a sign language interpreter at the time and teaching sign language interpreting at U of A. And the deaf community like set up an altar out at the street in front of our house and would come by and light candles and leave stuff. And so we could see, and they didn't all know me well enough to sort of come in. But I just loved the way they honored Ben and honored us in a way that wasn't intrusive, but was so, so beautiful. And, of course, people brought food but the most important thing were just those people that just listened and sat and I had the need to tell the story over and over again. I was, you can't take it in so easily, right? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like the people would say about Matt, well, he's only 5, he's almost 6, but he doesn't really understand what's going on. And I was like, oh, I think he understands as much as we do. I mean, how do you understand that your kid is playing and then a few hours later they're gone?
Yeah.
It's just hard to understand. And just like any massive and sudden change, it takes a long time to integrate it.
Yeah.
And so, that's the process they were embarking on, is how do you integrate this reality into who you are and who your family is and how your people know you, how your friends know you, how your family knows you.
Mm-hmm.
There were so many people who came right in, and then there were definitely people who couldn't, who it was too scary for them to come in close.
Yeah.
And
did you lose friends over that?
I lost a couple of friends eventually. It took a little longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely did. And that's a common experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to be close friends with people like us because it is such a massive thing.
Yeah.
It's exhausting and we don't have a choice.
Yeah.
But some people do have a choice, right? They can kind of get themselves out of it a little bit. Mm-hmm. And as the person that they're leaving, that really hurts. But at the same time, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, relationships definitely are changed. My background is linguistics and communication stuff. So I'm fascinated by what people say and how we say things and why some things feel good that people say, why other things feel awful. And so it wasn't too long before I was sort of meta processing, like looking down and thinking, oh, that's so interesting. I can't take it when people say that to me, but I sort of knew why I couldn't take it, which is, maybe the benefit and the curse of having that academic background. And I just started, I pretty quickly realized that I needed to treat it seriously, the grief, and not like treat it as a pathology, but to treat it as something that needs attention.
Yeah.
And which included taking care of my physical self. So making sure I could sleep. Wasn't easy to sleep. Making sure
Did you take medications to help you sleep?
I took like Benadryl.
Okay.
My doc, he's like, if this will work, just sort of give you that drowsiness. Mm-hmm. I think I took Benadryl for maybe 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah. And it worked. And it didn't like knock me out, and make me feel bad. But definitely, and then there's always that. Do you experience this? Everyone I talk to does that moment when you wake up in the morning and you don't know your reality for like a split second.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the movie 50 First Dates with an Adam Sandler movie?
Not in recent times.
So that
is
whole
that what
thing,
it's about?
what it is about is the girl he starts dating has this amnesia that every night she forgets. And so part of the story is her dad tries to make it so that it's the same day every day. And so he bought like a bunch of newspapers the day that she died. So because she can remember, right? Right. But then instead he's like, no, we need to introduce to her and let her know. So he makes a video every night about like, this is her life. This is what happened. You got in the wreck. Right. And I tell people sometimes it's like that. You wake up and you're like, oh, it's a new day. And then all of a sudden it crashes down. Yeah.
And then you remember, and it's literally like a split second.
Yeah.
Right. But there's this split second, like for people that haven't experienced this, it's like that when you wake up in the morning, you're like, is it Saturday? Oh no, it's Friday. I have to go to work.
Yeah.
Right? It's like that, but it's, a gazillion times worse because you're like, oh, is it? Oh my gosh. You know, and that the reality of where you are is, comes crashing in again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
So physical exercise was a big, important part of my, I don't like to say recovery. I don't like the word journey, although I totally respect other people do like the word journey, process, road, whatever.
What were the key physical things that you would go do?
I'm a runner and a swimmer. I was a runner. I can't run anymore. But running you can just get a bunch of stuff out, it like moves around all the stuff that gets stuck in there. And for swimming is, I'm on a team and it was really powerful because I had this sort of social connection with other humans part, but also your face is in the water.
Yeah.
And you have that solitary part too. And I could just I could cry hard and people didn't know, I'd be like in the water going, in the water. And I would just we'd do a sprint set or something and I would just and I played on a soccer team too. Okay. And my soccer team actually ended up being one of my most important support systems. We all grew super close during that time. But if I didn't exercise, so exercise was like you know that concept like anchor habit?
Yeah.
Like it's the habit that helps you do the other things. So if I exercised well, then I was more likely to eat well.
Okay.
And I was more likely to sleep well.
Okay.
And it was often social connection too, which is so important. Not like social, like woo, social, but like other humans, social connections. So that was just a super, super, super important part for me.
And so most of your community, like you talked about the community that supported you would be through some of those like physical stuff, the soccer team, the swim team. And I would assume like university colleagues and stuff. And
did you go back to work right after?
Yeah, I went back to work, but not right after. So Ben died at the end of March and I didn't finish that semester. So that's, at this point in the semester, we have like 6 weeks left, right? Yeah. So I missed about 6 weeks and then summer, and then I went back in August.
Okay.
And I remember on the first day of work, I was like, I don't know if I can do this. That's how it felt. Literally did not know if I could do it. And so I went into my class. I had a smallish class and I just told them the story. And I said, I don't know if I can do this, but my just opening up and being transparent with them, they rallied for me and helped me, and they ended up being a safe place.
Wow.
Which was so cool. So I could do work, and which I really care about my work, and feel good about doing that work. And I could fall apart if I needed to, but I ended up not falling apart there often because it was such a safe place. I knew I could, I was okay being, focusing on other things there. It's almost like when people, if people say, oh, good, you're over it or something, it's almost like you dig your heels in a little on the grief and be like, no, but when people honor the grief and let you grieve and listen to you and stuff, it's like you trust them more, right? Yeah. You trust them. You can be yourself. You know that if you aren't talking about your child all the time, they don't think you've forgotten. That's just, I'm doing this job and I like this job and I'm focusing on you students and this feels good, So teaching at U of A ended up being a real safe space.
Wow.
Good.
My soccer team is a women's soccer team, ended up, still to this day, 23 years later, they'll come over this weekend and,
How long did you play soccer for then in that kind of like thing?
On that team, not very long.
Okay.
Like 2 years. But you know, Ben's death just really like brought us all together, all of us. Like they're the ones that really like planned his memorial service.
Wow.
They made like, they did all the photo, like they blew up all these photos of him. His service was outside and I didn't do it. I was just like, I came and there were photos of Ben hanging from all the trees and they had made art things that were hanging from the trees. And
beautiful.
All our kids went to school together. So our kids played soccer together. So the, you know, the kid, you know, one of them arranged this big thing at her house where we all came over and made these like, you know, hearts and stuff that the kids worked on that hung from the trees. And the kids made big like posters with their handprints and just community, you know, it's just like, we are going to surround you.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think it terrifies people, you know, when a tragedy happens that close.
For sure.
Yeah. And so the fact that they didn't run and that they came right in really close was just so beautiful. And then the kids' school where they went was also amazing. You know, I, of course, met lots of other families at the time who had experienced an death of their child. And a lot of them shared things like, you know, my other child, they won't talk about it at school. You know, my son's school, Matt's school, stopped everything, talked about death with these little children.
Wow.
Like, a lot of them went to the memorial service. Like the school brought them to the memorial service.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So they made this incredible scrapbook for us where even the littlest kids, you know, did drawings and stuff. I mean, the kids had heard that Ben turned blue. So there were so many drawings of Ben and he was blue.
Oh.
The older children wrote poetry and I mean, just stunning support.
Yeah.
From this sort of extended community. Really, really beautiful support. And at the same time, I felt really, really alone a lot of the time, you know? So it's just that human condition thing of us being individuals and being part of a collective.
Yeah.
Both. You have to hold sort of both of those things. And, but I knew that, and I know from my work that community piece is vital.
Yeah.
So important.
So these are all great examples of positive things that happened and people trying to support you. I think equally important, at least for this audience, to understand of what are some things that happened that maybe weren't so helpful, things people said or what they did that weren't helpful, just so that at least we can raise awareness to be like, hey, maybe don't say this or don't do this, right? So what are some of those?
Yes. Well, I do talks about this kind of stuff because, again, I'm a communication linguist person. And I just think that some people just don't really understand what the role of a supporter should be.
Yeah.
And it's not their own fault. It's really the culture. You know, it wasn't very long ago that we didn't talk about death. It wasn't very long ago, right? People died and we actually didn't talk about it at all, you know? So some people think it's kind to not talk about it, right? Or, you know, people will say things like, oh, I didn't want to bring it up, you know? And I would always say to people, oh, it's up.
Yeah.
Just consider it up. Yeah. You know, don't worry about bringing it up. Right. But I think that supporters think their job is to make you feel better or to cheer you up.
Yeah. Or to fix it somehow.
Right. Because that's will make you feel better.
Yeah.
Right. If it's fixed. Yeah. So if that's the outcome you think you're after, right. My job is to make sure that they feel they're happy. They cheer up, whatever. Here's what I have to do to get there, right? And if people understand that the outcome you're looking for is that the person feels supported and loved, right? Okay, what does it take to feel supported and loved? That's a completely different thing.
Yes.
So people, you know, I say to sort of simple things that people can remember, like never start a sentence with at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you start a sentence with at least, you're about to invalidate somebody's experience. Right? At least you have other children at home. I heard that. At least you have another son. At least he died fast. At least. And anytime,
and to echo that, we heard very similar stuff. Yeah.
Right. I know we both experienced sudden deaths.
Yeah.
We both have other children that we know. So I'm sure we heard the same things.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's those people also that completely avoid.
Yeah.
So the number one rule is avoid avoidance. That's the number one rule. Then number two, actually, take seriously that you can learn to support people.
Yeah.
That there are some communication skills that are necessary. There are some listening skills that are necessary. And that these are things that we can learn.
Yeah.
So the fact that people feel awkward, or uncomfortable, or even terrified to talk to people like you, to talk to people like me is understandable.
Yeah.
But the good news is there's a lot of resources for people to learn what to do, what to say, what not to say. There's tons of resources now. You can, have you ever put into ChatGPT about, you would be amazed. Just type into ChatGPT something like, my friend's child died recently. I don't know what to say. And then watch what comes back. It's
really
unbelievable.
And they're good answers.
Very good.
So we're going to insert that into the video right here. I have my phone here with ChatGPT up, and we're going to put in that exact prompt that she suggested. My friend's child died recently, and I don't know what to say. First off, ChatGPT just says, hey, I'm sorry that you're put in this position. It's hard and unfair that your friend is going through that, some stuff like that. Then here, this one's actually really good. It says, here are a few simple, heartfelt things you can say that don't try to fix it, but show you're present. If you're reaching out soon after the loss, like right after the loss, it gives a couple different examples. I don't have the right words to say, but I just want you to know that I'm here and I'm sorry. And then it also gives a couple tips of things not to say, even when you have good intentions. At least you still have X number of kids, which we just talked about in this podcast, or you still have this or that or whatever. Everything happens for a reason. Yeah. Heard that one a decent amount and still hear it, honestly. God needed another angel. Again, these are all things of maybe don't say. It says a few things not to say. And then the last one, let me know if you need anything. Instead of offering specifics like, can I bring you dinner on Tuesday? I'd have to agree with Jeanette. These are pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
It's good.
Really interesting.
So the point is there's no excuse now for not being able to.
There's resources,
Right. And really the bottom line is you want to listen to your people. You want to listen to them. You want to say their child's name.
Don't try to fix the problem.
Don't fix, you can't.
Yeah, it's unfixable.
It's unfixable and you're supposed to be sad.
Yeah.
You are supposed to be sad and you are supposed to be sad and I am supposed to be sad. And we can be sad and experience this experience we're supposed to experience while being supported by other people. And that's what they can give us, right?
Yeah.
Our supporters, our community can kind of hold us so that we don't have to be scared to fall apart if we need to. If I need to fall apart, I can know that these folks are going to catch me, right?
Yeah.
And hold me while I figure this out, right?
And it's okay to fall apart.
And that it's totally okay to fall apart, right? So when people tell us to be strong, not helpful.
No.
It's like, do you see me upright and breathing? That should be evidence of my strength to you right now. So be strong. Anything that starts with you should, again, giving advice is not what's needed.
Exactly.
And of course it always depends on what your relationship with the person is too.
Of course.
How close are you? Even if you're not super close, you can be so supportive by, sending cards if it's appropriate. Texting is a way that can be really like, I'm just thinking about you. I'm thinking about you. Don't feel like you need to respond. I just want you to know I love you. These little messages, being thought of, our child being remembered. These things are really, really valuable to us. So yeah, I experienced all those things that people said. One of the worst ones was when somebody said, do you want me to teach you how to do a tracheotomy?
Wow.
That's terrible.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to be a linguist to know that the subtext of that is you should have been able to save him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talking about the details of the death, I think you have to be quite a bit closer to people, really, really listen and take your cues from the people telling the story. I mean, usually we do want to tell the details, even when they're really difficult. But it takes a lot of vulnerability and a lot of trust to tell those details, because sometimes we do feel like we should have been able to do something, right?
Yeah.
We always feel that way.
Of course.
As parents, we always feel like, why didn't I see this coming? Why didn't I, whatever.
What have you done to grapple with that? Because even you said it at the beginning, right? Of like, you could tell that all of the first responders were like, you did what you could. And so they all thought that, oh, this mother's going to blame herself.
Right.
The doctor coming to you, right? And in your words, that's what you said. So how did you work through that?
Yeah. I mean, that doctor especially was helpful. I tried to, it took some time, but honestly, that doctor helped.
Yeah.
And I definitely went to therapy. But I am understanding that I love that child,
of course,
more than anything. And all I wanted for him to be was okay. And I did my best. I was faced with this super unusual situation, my child going unconscious in front of me. I had the skill to do CPR. I did it. I later found out, something like 6% of, times you use CPR actually works. So I guess maybe that helps me feel better. But you still do all the what ifs. Yeah. So speaking with other families at Children to Children, speaking to Dean and us working with a counselor and stuff around that stuff is what I needed to do. And then again, I have a little bit of a meta thing, this academic part of me that knows social science. So it's like, I know the social science says this. And so I can sort of apply that to myself. And I know that we try to, that we blame ourselves partly because if we are at fault, it means we could have stopped it. Right.
Yeah.
It means
we wanted control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We want to, if we can blame ourselves, it means, okay, we have control. It's not going to happen to our other kids.
Yeah.
Right. If we say, I couldn't control it, and then that means it can happen again. Right.
Yeah.
Which of course it can.
Yeah.
It's
And that's
surrendering to
terrifying.
chaos.
Exactly.
And it's terrifying. Yes.
It's terrifying. Right. And most humans walk around in the world not being aware of it like we are now.
Yeah.
Right. And when you meet other families, as you are with this podcast now, you hear all of these horrible stories and all the things that can happen.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I never even consider that. I should be afraid of that.
Yeah.
Right. And you start adding to the list of all the scary things in the world. But at some point you have to reach some sort of equanimity, that sort of just matter of factness that there is chaos in the world and that we can't control. And the thing we can control is loving our family and doing our very best.
Yeah.
Which I know I did. Could something have been done differently and maybe he would have lived? I don't know.
Yeah.
Dean then blamed himself too. And I'm like, how can you blame yourself? I was home with him. He's like, because he cut his finger and he had gone to urgent care and he took Ben with him to urgent care. He thinks Ben caught croup virus at urgent care, right?
Yeah.
So he's trying to come up with his story about why it's his fault, right? Or and maybe Ben got the virus at daycare,
Who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah.
But that's the point. And I mean, some people know exactly what or who to blame for the death of their child. If a child is murdered or whatever, hit by a car or something like that, maybe there is somebody to blame. But a lot of times it's hard to know what to blame. And I think I'm grateful that I don't have something to blame.
Yeah.
I think I'm grateful. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think I am. Nature, a virus is what's to blame.
A new phrase for me that I've used a lot is crap happens.
Crap happens.
I
say that same thing, but a little differently.
It does. It just, sometimes you can try to control as much as you can and it just
It's not
happens.
possible.
Right.
Absolutely. And we can't think about that too much because we wouldn't get out of bed in the morning,
True.
right?
Yeah.
In fact, I asked the doctors after Ben died, I said, why don't doctors take croup more seriously? Because my kids had croup before. I had known the protocol. And they said the same reason we aren't alarmed getting in our car when we drive anywhere. Driving is dangerous, right?
There's always a risk.
But we can't think about that all the time. And that's the same with some of these
Illnesses.
things that kill our children lots of different ways.
Yeah.
They are not that common. If something's common, we got to figure, but sometimes things, crap happens. And you use the word, and I use this word all the time, that surrender. And that word surrender, not in a weak way, but it's like this sort of, I feel like it's powerful. And once I could sort of surrender to what is real, that's when I started getting peace around it.
Earlier, you mentioned Ben's bells. Tell us about that a little bit.
So, so like you all were motivated to start this podcast in memory of Sunny.
Yeah.
I also, and like many, many people, had an urge to do something in Ben's memory.
And how soon after the fact were you having that urge?
The urge came pretty fast.
Yeah.
You're not the only ones. The urge came pretty fast to do something. And I did a couple of things before Ben's Bells came out. The first thing I did was did people send you the book Tear Soup?
Yes.
Yeah. So I really liked that book because a lot of the grief books are, but this one I liked it because it was like, here's this process, it's going to be super intense. I love in the Tear Soup book, there's this one page where, so they compare grief to making this big batch of soup. And there's this one page where there's a whole bunch of different sizes of pots and there are different words on them. Like the more than I can bear is on the very biggest pot. And Matt and I would read this book together and he would pick his pot and I would pick my pot. Like you could decide sort of where you were with your grief. And then eventually you put the soup into the freezer and bring it out now and then, it was just this sort of very normalizing of grief.
Okay.
So one of the first things I did was like call those authors and like started ordering that book like by the case.
Wow.
Yeah. And I didn't have enough money to buy them myself. But my friends would all chip in and get a book. And it just really helped because it gives a lot in the back. It gives a lot of stuff around communicating with people who are in grief and supporting people who are in grief. And I highly recommend that book. So that was sort of the first thing. It was, I even put a little book plate in the front of them that was called Tear Soup for Tucson in memory of Ben. But then the idea for Ben's Bells, my parents lived on the coast of Oregon.
Okay.
I grew up in Tucson. My dad was a professor at the university in Tucson, but they retired on the coast of Oregon. And there was this, around the year 2000, the big new millennium thing, there was this glass blower who was making those glass fishing floats and like leaving them on the beach for people to find. So that idea of found art was kind of like in my brain. And so when Ben died, I sort of ran with that idea and started making these ceramic wind chimes in our garage. I have a little ceramics background, just with my friends and family. And we would just sit and gather and talk and, just hang out and talk about Ben and talk about grief. And it was just this communion thing that was so beautiful. And by the first anniversary of Ben's death, we had 400 of these bells made.
Wow.
Yeah. So we partnered with Tunadito, that nonprofit I talked about. And we put a little sort of makeshift website on the tag and it says, "You have found a Ben's bell, take it home and remember to spread kindness." And then we hung these bells just all over for people to find.
Wow. Sort
of a la those glass fishing floats. And, so we all met at our house and we had like maps of Tucson that we had cut up and we handed everybody like a section of Tucson and a bag of bells and everybody went out and didn't hide them, but just hung them and with this tag. And then that was going to be the end of it. But what happened was we got so many stories back from the people who found bells. So many stories. And they were fascinating in the need for this kindness and connection and this idea that we need to be working on community more.
Yeah.
So there were tragedies like ours, people saying, this bell meant so much to me. I recently lost my mom or whatever. And these stories, but there were also stories like, I'm a University of Arizona student. Finding this bell really changed my perspective. I've been really whiny lately and stuff. And this made me like, so there were like just all these stories about, man, we need to sort of look at each other differently and what we have to offer each other.
Yeah.
And so we decided we would just keep that going. And we did. And I was working at the university at the time teaching and full time. So I just did it on the side. And it just had this community kind of organic energy. So like 6 months later, we hung out another batch of hundreds and hundreds. And then it was, so then like the news, it was right when the Iraq war was breaking out. So this is like, yeah. Okay. And so the news picked it up. And I think because it was like a hopeful story, And we needed hope when the war was breaking out. And so we got like front page above the fold kind of coverage. So all of a sudden it just had sort of a lot of attention. And so we ended up, having a space near the university, and it just grew and grew and grew until I had to quit my job at the university.
Wow.
Yeah. And so now, now it's much, much bigger. We've hung out about 100,000 bells,
Oh my.
all over the world. And really the point of it is, this sort of kindness education side of things. Like, what do we have to do to be kinder?
Yeah.
We might have kind, intention, motivation, but what are some of the skills we need? Like we've already talked about, what does kindness look like to grieving parents or whatever? So it's really all about helping people improve their kindness skills, helping people support each other better, keeping kindness really front of mind and salient in the world. We work a lot in K-12 schools. We work with businesses. We work in healthcare a lot. And now I'm a professor at the university, and my research sort of informs the programming at Ben's Bells, so that we can help make these community connections stronger.
Wow. That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely turned into something I didn't expect it to.
Yeah.
Which was cool. It really sort of spoke to, the power of community. And I think at this stage of the world, we really need to kind of get louder about it, because there's a lot of messaging out there that makes it seem like we should be cruel to each other. So getting louder about kindness is sort of where we are.
I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
I agree. Our world is definitely full of not great things, and people do pit each other against each other. And it's sad.
It's really sad.
I love one of the things that you mentioned though about kindness, how it's different than just being nice. Because being nice seems like, let's just all go flow together,
Right.
Yeah.
and just like whatever, and you do you, and versus being able to be like, no. We're in this together. Let's try to get something unified together that you can benefit, I can benefit, as opposed to either I benefit and you don't, or you benefit and I don't. Right?
Absolutely. And as a social scientist, I know that that's where we thrive. That's where humans thrive, is in that place of we look out for each other. That's how we survived, and we don't have to have like competition for competition's sake. We actually do better when we support each other, when we work together. And we really do have to work against some of these cultural messages that say, everybody's out for themselves and stuff, because actually that's not what the research tells us. Research actually tells us that people care about kindness, care about helping each other. But it also tells us that people are sort of a little bit afraid and feel like, I don't want it to be awkward and that sort of thing. So that's why we have to get out there and talk about it and share some of the science that says, well, actually, people really do appreciate when strangers say hello to them. And you really can connect with people in a way that's not intrusive. And it does communicate to people that they are part of something, and that they are safe, and that they're cared about. And frankly, that's what we have in this world, right? It's you can get pretty philosophical about it, but what's the point of being if you're fighting all the time, right? When we can make choices that allow us all to just thrive so much more. And thriving doesn't mean being happy all the time, right? Yeah. That's why I don't study happiness.
Yeah.
I study kindness, because kindness is relevant in good times and bad times. And happiness is an outcome of kindness.
And kindness is a practical application of
it's behaviors.
Attributes of something, right?
Exactly. It's behaviors, right? So I'm a behavioral scientist, right? What do we do? What predicts these behaviors? And then that's what we work on. Okay. We work on, how do we help people, and skills predict behaviors, right? If you don't know how to talk to a dad who's lost his daughter, a mom who's lost her daughter, you're not going to, right? If you don't know how to do it, you're going to avoid.
Of course.
Right? So a predictor of that behavior is helping people learn how to do it.
Yeah.
It's simple as that. Right. There are other predictors as well, but that's the point of it. We target those predictors to help people have the confidence to be able to go ahead and do those kind of behaviors that they actually want to do. Most people actually want to do kindness.
So you started Ben's Bells, and then how long? And then you quit your job from the university, And then how long after that were you like, oh, I need to go back and I need to start studying things and studying kindness? Like, what made you decide all that?
Yes. So I was the executive director of Ben Spells for 17 years.
Oh my.
Yeah, 17 years. But the bigger Ben Spells got, we ended up with, offices in Phoenix and Tucson on the East Coast.
Oh, wow.
And the bigger it got, the more of an administrator I became, right? I was running a business.
Yeah.
And I'm like the on the ground human interaction piece of things because I'm a social scientist. So, and through all my experiences with Ben Spells over 17 years, I was really learning a lot from the people, right? I was listening. I was understanding what sort of people's beliefs about kindness are, what some of the barriers to kindness are. Fact, like people think kindness is sometimes the same as niceness, that it's just soft, and I know that's not the case, and so I ended up with lots of questions, and so about 6 years ago, I stepped down from Ben Spells and went back to school.
Wow.
Yeah,
At
middle-aged
U of A?
student at the University of Arizona,
Okay.
full-time student in a PhD program.
Wow.
So I did a PhD, which was not easy, and at the same time, it was like. And you'll be able to relate to this as parents of many children.
Yeah.
It was like to focus on my own learning was such a privilege, right? Because when you're it's everything out for everybody, which is great. But it was like, whoa, I'm dedicating some time to spending time in my brain and learning so that I can do this better.
Yeah.
And so even though it was really hard, it was also, I just felt like the privilege is the word I keep coming back to, because it was like I felt so privileged to be able to take this time to incorporate all my life experiences into this thing that I needed to learn in order to get me to the next step. So now I have a PhD and I'm a professor, and I don't study kindness like the outcomes of kindness. There are a lot of people that do that. So when we're kind, these good things happen.
Yeah.
It's really established and people are still studying it. I study how do we do it? Like, how do we increase kind behavior?
Yeah.
That's where my.
And do you teach classes on kindness?
Well, she's the director of kindness and community collective.
Science of Kindness Community Collective, right? Which is a new thing at the university. And really
It's like 2 years old now or something?
Yes. It's just brand new. But the idea was, so my research, I did a lot of community engaged research. So from the people, like in organizations, what does kindness mean to them? What does it look like? Like I started like in a hospital. If this was the kindest hospital ever, how would you know? That's where you get to the behavior, right?
Of course.
What will you see? What will you hear? What will you notice? Because it's one thing for like a hospital to say, we're kind, but you actually need the doctors, the nurses, the technicians, the culinary staff to be doing kind behaviors in order for the place to be kind. Yeah. Beyond those kind behaviors, there's also like the physical space and the policies and stuff. And, how are you caring for the humans, right? So that's so we did that research and we ended up with a whole lot of behaviors. We learned that people really, really value these behaviors. So if people don't care about this, there's no point in talking about it, right? But people do. So now we really are looking at, okay, then how do we actually increase these behaviors? Yeah. Right. And that's what we're working on.
Okay.
Wow. That's super awesome.
Yeah,
it's really, really interesting. Yeah. Because people, so it's not so much that I'm trying to turn mean people kind. It's more, people want to do kindness, but there are a lot of reasons people don't. Yeah. And so it's sort of targeting those and trying to remove barriers and communicate the things that people need in order to go, like just greeting people, greeting strangers is really, really good for us because if you're if you're on U of A campus or ASU campus or wherever, and there's sort of a friendliness that gives you a sense of security, right? As a human, it's like, here I am in a place that is welcoming to me and warm. And that does something for our psychology, right? Our ability to feel good, let down all our defenses and stuff like that. So there are different kinds of kindness, and they're all important. And friendliness is one kind of kindness, right? That sort of communicates a greater community sort of connection. But then there's also the emotional support kind of kindness. There's helping behaviors. So there's different categories that we've identified. And then we work on trying to create the conditions so people will do more of it.
Wow.
I feel like it's really hard, especially now with all the technology we have, for people to just say hello, because lots of people have earbuds in their ears. And so they're not even going to hear you if you do say hi. And you're like, oh, well, now I feel stupid for saying hi because they didn't even hear me.
You just said so much there, Camille. Just that, like, I'm going to feel stupid. So that's what you intervene on the belief. That's where you intervene.
Okay.
So you have to know what people believe. And I'm going to feel stupid, or people are going to think I'm weird, is a belief, especially on college campuses.
Yeah.
And so we work with that, right? What does it look like? Like, I took our students, we walked across campus and I gave them be kind stickers. I'm like, give these to strangers. And they were like, no way, And so we talked through it and I said, okay, what will you do if somebody rejects you, right? What if they say no, or if they ignore you or whatever? And so first we talked through that and we decided we'll be okay.
Yeah.
If someone rejects us, we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I demonstrated it, and some people rejected me, and we, whatever. By the end of our long walk, they were like, give me another sticker, give me another sticker, give me another sticker. Because they were getting this incredible feedback from other people. Like, oh my gosh, thank you. Whoa. And people would stop and look at, they were having these like moments that were powerful. And ultimately it's those moments, including and moments with people that we're closer to and we know better, those moments of kindness added up that create our experience in the world.
Yeah.
Right. So we need to create more of those, because we know that negative, unkind experiences, actually, we remember them easier. They have a little bit more impact. Like they're, one kind experience, and one unkind experience, that unkind one, is going to be worth like 4 or 5 kind experiences. That's just the way our brain works. So how do we increase these? We call them in this intervention we do called green dots. How do we increase the green dots? These kind positive interactions.
Yeah. I just love what you've done to bring that all over around the world. And it's just amazing.
Oh, thank you.
You're awesome.
It's an ongoing project for sure.
Yeah.
But people are into it. And that's why, especially now, I work with a bunch of undergrads who are so passionate, and that's what gives me hope in this world, because I know that there are some people with very loud voices out there who are not sort of kindness advocates. But I know that for regular folks, like, right here in our communities, like our neighbors and we do care about each other.
Yeah.
And so we have to like focus on our places and our spaces and our neighbors and our local stuff, and really celebrate the kindness and encourage the kindness and help people know how to do kindness and connect better, because that is what, that's what makes us thrive in the world. So.
Many of our guests have also alluded to how any type of religion or belief in God has helped them. Did that play a part at all in your experience, or not at all?
No, it does. I don't have a set religious beliefs. I went to Catholic, I'm not Catholic, but I went to Catholic high school for a couple of years, and I was raised my parents were sort of exploring.
Yeah.
They were raised as Methodists, but they were sort of in the, exploring different things. So I definitely was raised with some religious teachings and stuff. And then I can't remember when it happened, but I sort of decided that I couldn't understand it, and that that's how it should be.
Okay.
Like, it makes sense to not really understand it, but to almost trust in it.
Yeah.
So I definitely have sort of some spiritual beliefs and trust in whatever
that is.
Yeah. And that I interact with that regularly. Sometimes it's Ben, sometimes I talk to Ben as if he were the angel or whatever.
Yeah.
But I also just believe in something that happens between humans, and that I trust in that goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's spiritual, but I'm not sure if it's religious.
Yeah.
No, totally fine.
Yeah.
No, that's a great perspective. And even it goes in more to what we talked about before about that surrendering, right?
Yeah.
To surrendering to, like, I get it that I can't have control of all of it, but I surrender that to whatever this is.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's a word that would describe my spirituality. Surrendering to not knowing and not understanding, but also this strange trust that there's something there. Like I almost feel like, like, I hope that when I die, it's like, the back of a tapestry is like all messy strings and stuff that you flip it over and you see it. Like it makes sense that the beauty of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So my mom had some really, really specific spiritual beliefs. And I think she influenced me a lot, but her stuff was always a little bit out there too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And then how did all of this impact your relationship with Dean, your husband? Yes.
Yes. My ex-husband,
Okay.
I call him my husband because we really, really love each other. We did get divorced and everyone's like, oh, losing a child makes you get divorced. Absolutely not the reason we got divorced. In fact, I think losing Ben together gave us, and being together, we were together another 8-9 years after he died, gave us the strength to let go and know that we could still love each other, still be a family.
Good.
So we are very different people as far as how we grieved. I was much more out there with my grief and he was much more internal. But we really leaned on each other pretty well. I would say, losing a child is that loss where you're both affected, right?
Yeah.
Like, if my parent dies, I can lean on Dean or whatever his part, but the child thing, it's like you both have to figure out how to lean on each other. And I really do think that we did pretty well together.
Okay.
We ended up adopting children.
Oh, wow.
2 years after Ben died. And that was really, really challenging.
Yeah.
So a whole nother,
How old were those kids?
They
that
were
you
4 and 8 when we adopted them from Russia. So that introduced a whole big dynamic into our family.
Yeah.
Our daughters had been through trauma in Russia, in Russian orphanages. And so then the three of us had been in trauma. So it was like this little trauma family together, and trying to negotiate all those relationships and challenges was something else. And now looking back, I try to have a very kind and compassionate take on it.
Yeah.
But it was a lot to take on at that time. Less than 2 years after Ben died.
Oh man.
Wow.
But it's also really good that way. Like I can't imagine what our process would have been like without that in it.
Yeah.
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 So
What are some of the other relationship dynamics, not necessarily husband and wife, but what are some of the other relationships, friendships, or other things that this had an impact on?
Well, I had very close friends, like family kind of friends who we talked about a little earlier, were the ones who had to let go eventually.
Yeah.
That one of those, so it was a couple, married couple. She actually said to me, I just really loved you before Ben died. That kind of language.
Oh.
The new person was not.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry for that.
I know.
Yeah,
you can partly brutal. Understand a little bit too, because you're a changed person too, right?
Changed,
I
do understand it in hindsight, and I protect myself from it, right? At the same time, I wouldn't sort of go back. So I do understand, because not only were we grieving Ben, but then we took on this huge adoption, and things are chaotic.
Yeah.
We were exhausting to be around. It was hard to be around us. I remember they were, excited to, take a weekend in Vegas or something like that. And I'm like, that's just not in our world anymore, because we had all this responsibility. But there was definitely years and years that we weren't fun. And, I get that that's exhausting, tiring. Yeah. So that was sort of the most significant relationship. And again, I do understand it.
Yeah.
I also have to be sort of compassionate to myself and what I was going through and what we were going through in order to, there doesn't need to be any blame.
Then the other relationship that I would throw in that mix too is the relationship with your other son, Matt. Yeah, Maddie.
Yeah. So Maddie, I heard shortly after Ben died, I heard a George Bush quote that really stuck with me. He lost his sister when he was about 6 years old, and she was about 3. So about the same as Matt and Ben.
Yeah.
And as an adult, as our president, what he remembers about losing his sister was losing his mom to the grief. And I heard that early on after Ben died. I can't remember on the news, or I can't remember what it was. But I sort of vowed to myself that was not going to happen for Matt. He was not going to lose me. I mean, I was going to grieve. I wasn't going to hide my grief, but I was not going to disappear into it.
Yeah.
And I was not going to neglect him.
Of course.
And I was going to make sure he was okay. And so that gave me a lot of meaning. You know, when I really needed to scary grieve, I would sort of get myself out of the house and like scream or whatever I had to do.
Or run.
Yeah. Do my run, scream in the pool, whatever it was. But I needed to make sure that he was okay. And so he was okay. And remember, I told you they had a shared bedroom and then a playroom, and he couldn't be in that bedroom anymore. So like in the first week after Ben died, I was like,
swap it or something.
Cleared out the playroom, painted it. Like he was totally into Harry Potter. So like, you know, put like some, you know, lightning bolts on the walls. And we were reading Harry Potter at every night at bedtime. And so I would crawl into bed with him and read Harry Potter. And so, I mean, like I redecorated his room within the first week.
Wow.
Yeah. You know, some people leave their child after their child dies, their room intact for a very long time. And Ben's was taken apart the very first week. And then we, you know, took him to children and stuff. What was really fascinating, so he was about 6, really precocious kid though, really, you know, reading Harry Potter. But years later, so probably 10 years ago now. So when he was a teenager, 17, 18, something like that. Do you know about StoryCorps? StoryCorps is like an NPR program where they just, they bring people together, like family members or whatever, and they just have them like talk to each other and tell stories. And look it up because it's really cool. And then they archive them in Washington D.C. in the archives. So StoryCorps comes to Tucson, and Matt and I got on the list.
Wow.
And so I got to sit with Matt in this recording studio and just talk to him about that time after Ben's death. And so we have a recording of that.
That's cool.
And it's fascinating because I get his almost adult version, like looking back. And I learned things like he said, I remember, you know, at Ben's memorial service, that the candles that we all had, and Colin and I were like playing with the wax on the candles and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, that wasn't his memorial service. You know, we didn't, because his memorial service was during the day. This thing that he was talking about was this like nighttime thing that was later. So it was like, oh my gosh, this child has a completely different memory of, and it just gave me so much insight into him. And then talking about the adoption and how hard it was when the girls came in. And we still talk about this, you know, the girls and stuff. We all talk about, you know, how we came together in this like explosion of trauma, all of us. But yeah, just getting to sort of see through Maddie's eyes in that experience was amazing. And now he's a dad and I'm a grandma.
Wow.
And he has a child. And so now I'm watching him like in this different role and sort of knowing that we both know what we know and are both probably a little terrified, but we're doing, you know, we're doing life, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think we have a very close and special relationship, and he was traumatized.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. It was really a big deal. I mean, and it goes beyond just the death. It was the seeing me do CPR. It was the, you know, it was, there was
the EMTs
ambulance
and stuff
come, you know, hiding in a closet, you know, and then the girls coming in, and you know, one of my daughters was violent, and I would have to pull Matt outside, you know, so there was this actual trauma. And, you know, recently we've been using terms like trauma-informed care more, and it's been really enlightening to actually acknowledge that this was trauma in our lives.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't just this little thing. This is trauma, and trauma changes you
Yes.
and changes your brain. And it makes sense that, you know, like I had panic attacks after Ben died. I have, you know, that there's actually your chemistry changes, you know? And so that has really helped me sort of honor what a big deal this experience is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you could go back to yourself right after Ben died and tell yourself something to help you to just keep going, what would you tell yourself?
Yeah, I love that question because when at the time the therapist was saying, imagine yourself in 10 years, what would that person tell you? It's actually a super valuable exercise, like thought experiment, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, I would want her to be so gentle with herself. You know, it's like making me choke up.
Yeah.
She loved that child so much, more than anything, you know, loved her two babies.
Of course.
And I would want her to know that she was being held, that she was cared for, that she was precious, that she did her best, you know, and that she was going to be able to incorporate all this into her life, and that she was going to thrive. Because I do feel like I want people to know who are going through this that you can thrive and you will thrive. You know, I know we like to say things like you never get over it. And it's you don't. That's sort of not the point though, or the goal. But I really think it's important to know that you can have this incredible tragedy and sadness and this and both thing and live a super important, meaningful life and, you know, help support your family and be important for other humans like you are for me right now. It helps me, and I would tell Jeanette 23 years ago that we are a human animal. You know, we are an animal that, you know, things happen that we can't control and that we do our best, and that she was. Yeah. And that she was going to be all right. And I am all right, even though I feel like I'm not all right sometimes, you know?
Yeah.
But I am all right. And I really am. I feel like I'm so much more of a human, you know, like having experienced something like this, I just can see the humanity more. Like I feel like I'm kinder, definitely, but more compassionate, less judgmental, you know, like if I see somebody even being awful, I was like, I wonder how they got there.
Exactly. You don't know what people have gone through.
Exactly. Instead of like, what a jerk, you know, I'm like, that person's hurting. You know, the hurt people thing, because I get it.
Yeah.
You feel like you can't survive this, you know, and it does feel very alone, even when you're in a family that is all happening to. It's like, what do you do with that feeling? And it's just so good to know that you're not alone, that you literally are another human, and this is a human experience that's happening.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To turn back a little bit to kindness, how much of a role has kindness played in your healing or being able to walk forward with this trauma? Yeah. How has kindness impacted that?
Everything. So, and from my research, kindness is a very broad thing, but basically it's kindness is communicated, right? Mm-hmm. So it's how we connect with each other in a way that communicates that idea that I see you, you're human, I'm holding you. So we do that in compassionate ways, like supporting and helping. And we do that in celebratory ways, like, you know, it's your birthday and you're awesome, you know? And when that comes from a place of kindness, which is a place of, this is what we're supposed to be doing for each other. This is why we're here, is to be this for each other. Kindness is everything. You know, I remember so vividly walking around campus at U of A, it's a huge university, after Ben died, and feeling like, how can the world be going on like so normally, you know, and how can I look so normal walking along here? And then, you know, some 19-year-old kid would like hold a door open for me. Yeah. And I would want to say, you know, I know you think you're just holding open a door, but, you know, blah, you know, here's my story. And I didn't do that, but I was like, if we knew. Yeah. What everybody was going through and how much these small acts of noticing each other and doing a small thing like holding a door or saying hello or helping you pick up something you dropped, that communicates that we are not alone in the world, that we are seen, that we are, being considered in the world. How much that means to us, we would all be doing it so much more because it feels great to be able to help people that way.
Yeah.
So that's why I study kindness. That's why kindness became my entire sort of life's mission. And again, not this sort of just niceness, but real, like what, and the question is, what does kindness look like in this situation? That's the question I ask over and over again. Even in, sometimes kindness is really hard, like means having a hard conversation, right? So what does kindness look like? And there's not always a clear answer, but the question is always worth asking.
And I might add, always worth doing too.
Well, kindness is doing.
Right. Starting, because you ask the question, but then you have to do something. If you just sit there and think about it the whole time, then nothing ever changes because you're still in the exact same situation you were before.
Exactly.
But doing something.
You have to do something. And that's why we study behavior, because you can have all the compassion in your head and all the empathy and all the feelings of kindness towards somebody. And if you don't actually stick your neck out a little and do something, which sometimes might be scary, it will not have its effect. So when I say kindness is communicated, that's what I mean. It has to be communicated, right? Mm-hmm. And as a communication person, we'd love to say, you can't not communicate. So if somebody's like avoiding you, that communicates something too,
of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So
we're always communicating.
We have to think about that. If my lack of behavior can also communicate something.
Yes.
Yeah. For sure.
So choose our behaviors, the behaviors that we want to communicate, that we care for each other, and know that when we do that, it feeds us too. So this idea that you just martyr, so you're martyring yourself and just giving and giving, and you're just going to be an empty shell, that's not really what kindness is. Kindness feeds the relationship, and relationships are what make us thrive.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Kind of a recap of all the highlights I've taken away is community support around where you were at with like the soccer team, the swimming, and even just the community trying to turn and outwardly do kind things to others with Ben's bells and fully focusing on that, jumping into university studies and doing that. And then I would say for me, kindness was actually through all of those, like intertwined through all of those, each one of those things. And so a huge focus just on kindness. And that's awesome to talk to you. I appreciate you coming on the podcast and being here.
You're an amazing person.
I appreciate you doing this, and I appreciate you inviting me to come visit you.
Yeah.
Nice to come up here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us on the Lost Child podcast. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe. And remember, shine bright, and we'll see you in the next episode.